I always thought the end of a marriage would sound like something breaking. Raised voices, a door slamming, the sharp, undeniable crack of a life splitting in two. But mine ended with something much quieter. A sound so small and insignificant that I didn't even pay attention at first. A faint tapping under the hood of my car. That tapping became the thread that, once pulled, unraveled everything. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly in the background while you go about your life, slipping into the cracks of your routine, waiting for the day when you're forced to look it in the eyes. The truth is, the signs were there long before the garage ever entered the picture. But signs don't matter when you trust someone. Love blinds you not with passion, but with assumption. Assumption that the person beside you feels the same way they used to. Assumption that nothing could shift so drastically without you noticing. Assumption that loyalty is something you never have to question. I hold no anger toward my past self. He loved honestly. He believed deeply. He tried. He trusted. He was naive, yes, but he was loyal. And loyalty, even when misplaced, is not something to be ashamed of. The first real change came so quietly that I barely registered it. My wife started insisting on taking the car for even the smallest errands. She said she wanted to be more independent, to help out, to handle little responsibilities herself. It seemed harmless, even thoughtful. I didn't question it. I had no reason to. But independence wasn't what she was after. She began mentioning the new auto shop she found. Nothing special, just a regular garage with fluorescent lights and a handful of mechanics. At the time, I assumed she was just happy to have found a place that didn't overcharge. People bond with their hairdressers, their baristas, their dentists. Why not a mechanic? The first time she came back from the shop, I noticed the faint smell of oil and rubber clinging to her clothes. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. It lingered on her skin even after she showered. But I didn't question it. There are 1,000 innocent explanations for a smell. But explanations lose their innocence when they repeat too often. Soon it became routine. She visited the garage more and more frequently, sometimes twice a week, sometimes more. She said the car needed adjustments, tune-ups, inspections, small fixes. Funny thing is, the car was fine. Better than fine. She, on the other hand, seemed increasingly alive after each visit. Energized in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. There was a spark in her eyes, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of spark that doesn't come from checking tire pressure. Her phone started becoming a permanent extension of her hand. The screen always turned downward. The brightness always dimmed. Notifications silenced. The perfect setup for a secret life. Whenever it buzzed, even slightly, she would tense for a moment. A reflex she tried to hide with an easy smile or a casual glance away. But I saw it. It was impossible not to. I didn't confront her. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to believe it. Denial isn't stupidity, it's self-preservation. Your heart fights your mind for as long as it can, and your mind allows the fight because losing feels too painful. One night she came home later than usual. Her hair slightly messy, her clothes smelling faintly of engine heat again. She moved around the house quietly, like her body was present but her mind had stayed somewhere else. I watched her brush her fingers through her hair, watched the small smile she tried to suppress, watched the exhaustion mixed with a kind of emotional satisfaction she didn't bother hiding. That was the moment a crack formed inside me. Not a big one, just enough for doubt to seep through. But doubt grows. It spreads like water under paint. And once it soaks enough layers, the whole surface begins to bubble. A few weeks later, the tapping sound under my hood returned. Persistent, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. She immediately offered to take the car in. Too quickly, too eagerly. I told her I'd do it myself. Her reaction was subtle. A flash in her eyes, a tiny hesitation, the smallest shift in her shoulders, but it said everything. She wasn't just nervous. She was afraid. Not for me, for what I might discover. That was the day the truth stopped whispering and began knocking. I drove to the garage myself. The entire way there, my heart felt heavy but calm. A strange calm, The kind that comes before a storm you've pretended doesn't exist. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. The smell of the place hit me first. Oil, rubber, metal, exhaust. Then the arrangement of items on the counter, too familiar. Her jacket hung behind the register. Her handwriting on a sticky note taped to a tool cabinet. A coffee cup identical to one she used every morning. All these small details formed one enormous truth. She wasn't just visiting the garage. She had become part of it. Then the mechanic stepped out. Tall, heavy-built, hands stained with grease. A man who lived his whole life in this smell, this noise, this atmosphere. He looked at me with a mixture of recognition and discomfort. Not because he knew me, but because he knew what I was about to understand. Nothing needed to be said. Not a single word. His expression told the entire story. My wife hadn't found independence in this garage. She had found something else. Tension, excitement, validation, an escape, a life outside the walls of our home, a life she didn't want me to see. I left the garage silently, my car still unfixed, my marriage already ruined. Inside the car, I didn't cry, didn't shake, didn't collapse. I just sat there with a numb acceptance. It felt like finally seeing the full picture after months of staring at scattered pieces. I drove home slowly, every mile pulling me farther away from the man I had been, and closer to the man I had to become. The house felt different when I entered. Colder, emptier, even though nothing had changed. Except me. That night she acted normal, smiling, casual, distracted, carrying the scent of a life she didn't know I had already discovered. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear the lies she would use to patch a hole that was already too large to repair. I simply watched her, quietly, calmly, knowing that the woman in front of me was no longer the woman I married. The truth had already rewritten everything. And the next part of the story wouldn't be about saving the marriage. It would be about saving myself. The strange thing about betrayal is how quickly it becomes part of the routine once you finally recognize it. When you live in denial, every sign feels like an isolated moment. But once the truth settles in, the pattern becomes painfully obvious. After the day in the garage, everything around me looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Our home still had the same furniture, the same layout, the same quiet mornings and half-tired evenings. But the air between us had changed. It carried a heaviness, a tension that didn't come from conflict but from the absence of something essential: honesty. She didn't sense the shift in me at first. She walked through the house with her usual distracted energy, checking her phone more often than she made eye contact. She acted like a person living a double life, unaware that the walls between those two worlds were already collapsing. I found myself studying her in ways I hadn't before, not out of curiosity, but out of finality. The way she held her phone, the way she adjusted her hair before stepping outside, the sudden quiet smiles she wore when she thought no one was watching. These weren't random behaviors. They were emotional fingerprints of a connection she had chosen somewhere else. She still spoke to me, but not to connect, only to maintain a thin layer of normalcy. Her words were short, necessary, logistical. Her tone neutral, flat, almost rehearsed. It was like living beside someone who had already packed their heart and moved it to another address. The more I observed, the less I felt like confronting her. What was the point? A confession doesn't restore a broken trust. It doesn't undo the nights she spent emotionally absent, physically present, carrying the scent of another life on her clothes. Instead of anger, I felt a deep, steady acceptance forming inside me. A quiet understanding that what I saw in the garage wasn't a mistake. It was a choice she had been making for a long time. In the days that followed, she became even more disconnected from our home. Her steps quickened when she prepared to leave, as if the outside world pulled her with a force she could no longer resist. And every time she returned, her energy felt borrowed, like she had spent everything elsewhere and brought home the leftovers. There is a moment when you stop seeing your partner as the person they once were and start seeing them as the person they've become. A stranger wearing familiar clothes, a shadow of someone you used to trust, a presence that no longer brings warmth, only distance. I felt that shift every time she walked into a room. She didn't cheat because something was wrong with me. She cheated because something was missing in her. And she didn't know how to face it without reaching for someone who offered easy attention. The mechanic wasn't the cause. He was the escape, the excuse, the distraction she chose to avoid dealing with the emptiness she carried inside. One afternoon, she came home looking exhausted in a way she never did after work. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly out of place, the faint smell of engine oil following her like a shadow. She moved past me with her head down, avoiding my gaze, not because she feared I knew the truth, but because she feared confronting it herself. Watching her navigate the house felt like watching someone walking through a memory they no longer belonged to. She checked her phone in short, nervous intervals. She wandered from room to room like she was trying to find a space that still felt right. She couldn't sit still, couldn't relax, couldn't settle into anything. That was the moment I realized something important. She wasn't just avoiding me. She was avoiding the reality of what she had done. Her guilt wasn't loud. It was subtle, living in the way she forced smiles, the way she inhaled deeply before speaking, the way her hands trembled for a fraction of a second when she thought no one was looking. But guilt isn't enough to fix a broken marriage. It's just the shadow of a mistake you don't want to confront. Over the next week, she tried harder than usual to maintain some kind of normal rhythm. She asked casual questions she didn't wait to hear the answers to. She pretended to be concerned about things she hadn't paid attention to in months. She stayed home a bit more, as if trying to compensate for the time she had spent elsewhere. But it didn't change anything. Her presence felt forced. Her attempts at normalcy only highlighted how far we had drifted. It was clear she had two lives. One she nurtured, and one she maintained out of obligation. Guess which one we lived in? Even in the evenings, when she sat beside me on the couch, the connection was gone. Her body was there, but her heart wasn't. She scrolled on her phone while pretending to watch TV, her eyes darting to notifications she tried to hide. Sometimes she would laugh quietly at something on her screen. A soft, unguarded expression she never made with me anymore. That laugh cut deeper than anything I saw in the garage. It showed me where her joy now lived. Not here. The nights grew heavier, the silence thicker, her absence louder. I'd lie awake next to her, listening to her steady breathing, wondering how many nights she had spent beside me thinking of someone else, wondering how many lies she told herself to justify the choices she made, wondering how long she planned to keep living two different lives until one of them collapsed. But the more I wondered, the more I realized it didn't matter. She had already made her decision. The real question was when I would make mine. The turning point came unexpectedly, not through a dramatic event, but through a quiet moment that revealed more truth than any confrontation ever could. She stood in the kitchen one evening, her back turned to me, typing quickly on her phone. Her shoulders were tense, her breathing uneven, her posture shifting between excitement and anxiety. The screen lit up her face with a glow that had nothing to do with me. She wasn't texting a friend. She wasn't solving a problem. She was feeding the part of her life she had been hiding. She didn't notice me watching. And in that moment, something inside me finally settled. Not anger, not sadness, just certainty. Certainty that staying in this marriage would cost me more than leaving ever could. Certainty that I wasn't losing my wife. I was losing someone she no longer wanted to be. Certainty that I didn't need answers because the truth was already complete. I didn't confront her. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't ask why. Because none of those things matter when a marriage is already dead. I simply looked at her, the woman she had become, and the woman she would never be again, and I knew that the next step wasn't to fight for her. It was to walk away. Not out of weakness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. When she finally turned around and noticed me standing there, she froze for a moment. Something in her face flickered. Fear, maybe, or realization, or the faint echo of guilt. But I felt nothing. I had already stepped emotionally out of the marriage. My body just hadn't followed yet. And I understood one final, painful truth. You can't save a marriage someone else abandoned. You can only save yourself. There is a strange calm that settles in when you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding. Not peace, peace comes later. This is something quieter, heavier, almost hollow. A silence inside you that no longer wants answers or apologies, just distance. After watching her in the kitchen, absorbed in a world that didn't include me, I realized something that felt both devastating and liberating. I didn't love her the way I used to, not because love disappeared overnight, but because betrayal starved it slowly, day after day, until all that remained was the shape of a feeling that no longer existed. A person can only give affection for so long without having it returned. Eventually, the heart protects itself by pulling back. Mine had already begun the process long before I admitted it to myself. That night, lying beside her felt different. Not uncomfortable, distant, like sharing a bed with someone who was physically present but emotionally unreachable. Her breath was steady, relaxed, untouched by the storm she didn't know had already passed through me. I stared at the ceiling, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. And in that quiet darkness, I knew the marriage had crossed the point of no return. It wasn't the affair itself that killed it. It was the months she spent drifting away, leaving me to hold onto something she didn't care to preserve. The next morning, her presence felt even more out of place. She moved around the bedroom, gathering her things, living her routine, unaware that I was watching her with the clarity of someone who knew exactly what was coming. Her phone barely left her hand. She typed quickly, hiding the screen, glancing at it with a small spark that didn't belong to me. Her smiles were no longer for this house. Her energy was no longer for this marriage. Her excitement lived somewhere else, in a garage full of engine heat and attention she didn't have to earn. I watched her leave the house, pulling the door shut behind her, and realized that goodbye had already happened. It just hadn't been spoken aloud. The hours that followed were strangely calm. I walked through the house not as a husband, but as someone preparing to leave a place he once loved. Each room carried echoes of memories I no longer felt connected to. The living room that once held laughter now held only the weight of unanswered questions. The kitchen where we cooked meals together now felt like a space where distractions were created to avoid talking about the truth. The bedroom, the place meant to hold intimacy and safety, felt like a museum of a relationship long dead. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing, not thinking, just absorbing. The version of myself that had tried to save this marriage was gone. The man sitting there was someone else entirely, someone who had finally regained the strength to walk away. She wasn't evil. She wasn't heartless. She was lost. She was searching for a feeling she no longer found at home. And instead of facing it, she escaped into the arms of someone who made her feel desired. But escaping doesn't fix anything. It only exposes the cracks faster. I understood then that confronting her wouldn't change anything. Even if she cried, begged, or apologized, it wouldn't erase the months she spent choosing someone else. A broken foundation doesn't hold just because someone suddenly realizes they want it to. I needed my freedom more than I needed closure. Later that day, she returned home at a time that didn't match her usual schedule. There was a tension in how she entered the house. Not guilt, not fear, but an energy of someone who was juggling too many lies and beginning to feel their weight. She moved through the hallway like she was avoiding something. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away quickly. She forced a tired smile, the kind she used to hide discomfort. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched her hair. Maybe she sensed something in the air. Maybe she felt the shift in my presence. Maybe she was finally picking up what I had already known. She tried to sit near me on the couch, acting casual, but the distance between us felt larger than the entire room. She scrolled on her phone with her body angled slightly away, a defensive posture she didn't even realize she used. I watched her carefully, not because I needed confirmation, but because this was the last time I wanted to see her this way. The last time I wanted to absorb the version of her that had created this distance. As the evening went on, I noticed small cracks in her composure. She laughed at her phone, then immediately caught herself. Her breathing shifted each time a notification buzzed. She stole glances at me, trying to gauge whether I had noticed anything. She was living in fear of her own truth. Not fear of losing me, fear of being exposed. But I had no intention of exposing anything. I was done fighting battles that didn't belong to me. I sat there quietly, letting her struggle with her internal conflict while my mind became clearer with every passing minute. I didn't feel broken watching her. I felt something closer to release. The realization hit me gently. I no longer wanted a confession. I no longer wanted to fix anything. I no longer wanted her. I wanted myself back. And that desire outweighed every attachment I had left. That night was quiet. Too quiet. She went to bed early, claiming she was tired. I stayed behind, sitting in the dimly lit living room, thinking about the version of me I lost trying to hold onto a marriage she had already abandoned. Hours passed as I sat there, leaning back in the silence, feeling the weight of the decision solidify inside me. She slept peacefully, unaware that the world she had become comfortable in was shifting beneath her feet. Unaware that this was the last night I would ever sleep under the same roof as her. Unaware that her attempts to hide her actions were no longer relevant. I lay in bed beside her for the final time, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle into every corner of my mind. There was no anger left, no longing, no fear, only clarity, the kind that doesn't leave room for doubt. In the stillness of that night, I realized something important. I wasn't choosing to leave her. I was choosing to return to myself. When morning came, she woke before me for the first time in weeks. She moved quietly around the room, avoiding eye contact, moving with the careful steps of someone who felt something she couldn't explain. Maybe she sensed the emptiness in me. Maybe she felt the change in the air. Maybe her intuition finally caught up to her actions. But whatever she felt, she didn't know it was already too late. I watched her from the bed as she grabbed her things, rushed through her routine, and left the house with a forced calm. Her departure didn't hurt, confirmed what I already knew. We were two people living separate lives in the same space, and mine was about to finally move on. The morning she left the house without looking at me was the moment everything inside me aligned. Not with anger, not with heartbreak, but with a quiet understanding that the chapter we once called a marriage had been over far longer than either of us admitted. People always imagine endings as explosive moments. An argument, a confession, a dramatic confrontation where truth spills and someone storms out. But real endings? They arrive differently. Soft, constant, accumulating like dust on forgotten shelves until one day you finally see what has been sitting there all along. After she drove off, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, letting the stillness of the house settle around me. It was the same stillness I had been drowning in for months, but on that morning, it no longer felt suffocating. It felt clarifying. There is a rare kind of silence that doesn't ask for explanations. A silence that tells you the answer has already arrived. I knew what I needed to do, and for the first time in a long time, the decision didn't scare me. I moved through the room slowly, noticing how nothing felt like mine anymore. Not the couch where we once spent our evenings. Not the kitchen table where she scrolled through her phone while pretending to listen. Not even the walls that held photos of a life we once thought we were building. Everything felt like a memory of someone else's story. I walked into the closet and pulled out a suitcase. It had been years since I used it, yet it felt familiar in my hands, like a small, unnoticed symbol of freedom I had forgotten I owned. Filling that suitcase wasn't painful. It was strangely methodical, orderly, like packing away the remnants of a life that had stopped belonging to me long ago. A few shirts, some jeans, my shoes, important documents, nothing more. I took only what was mine. Nothing that would cause a fight. Nothing that would leave a mark. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her to hurt. Her choices had already punished her more than anything I could have said. I placed the packed suitcase by the door, then walked through the house one final time. Not as someone leaving, but as someone who had already left emotionally months before. The living room looked smaller. The kitchen felt colder. The bedroom felt foreign. The woman I married was gone. The woman who stayed was a stranger. And the man who had tried to save this marriage no longer existed. I walked to the kitchen, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote her a letter. Not accusatory. Not emotional. Just honest. A goodbye that didn't need her response. I placed my house key beside it. Two small objects that carried the weight of an ending. Stepping outside with the suitcase felt surreal. The world looked too familiar for a man who was leaving everything behind. But at the same time, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the weight I had been carrying dissolved the moment I crossed the threshold. I closed the door gently behind me. No anger, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Just finality. The sound of that soft click was the real ending. Not her affair. Not the day I saw her jacket in the garage. Not the weeks of silence or the nights of distance. The real ending was the moment I chose myself. I walked to the car with steady steps, placed the suitcase in the trunk, and sat behind the wheel. For a few seconds, I didn't start the engine. I just breathed, deeply, fully, like a man who had been holding his breath for far too long. When I pulled away from the house, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me I needed to see. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't anything special. A simple place with quiet neighbors and bare walls, but it felt like sanctuary. Place without tension, without secrets, without the smell of lies drifting in with the evening. At night, I lay on a mattress on the floor, listening to the hum of distant traffic, and felt more peace than I had felt in my own home in years. The divorce came quickly. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She didn't chase. Maybe she realized she had lost her grip on me long before I walked out. Maybe she understood that the same silence she used to distance herself had now turned against her. During the meeting with the lawyers, she avoided my eyes. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who finally faced the consequences of neglect she never believed would catch up to her. We divided the assets easily. There was no shouting, no accusations, no dramatic confessions. Just paperwork and pens, signatures, and quiet acceptance. A marriage ends long before the documents are signed. The signatures only confirm what has already died. When we walked out of the office, we didn't hug or linger or search for some poetic closure. We simply walked in opposite directions. Two strangers who used to be everything to each other. Healing didn't come immediately. There were moments of sadness, moments of anger, moments of quiet reflection. But there was also relief, steady, undeniable relief. I started rebuilding myself piece by piece. Cooking for one. Working late because I wanted to. Filling the apartment with things that felt like me. Sleeping deeply without the tension of unspoken things in the air. Slowly, my life became mine again. The funny part? I never hated the mechanic. He wasn't the reason the marriage fell apart. He was just the mirror that reflected the cracks that had been there long before. The truth is, you don't lose someone to another person. You lose them to the parts of themselves you stopped recognizing. She wasn't stolen. She drifted, and I refused to drift with her. One day, months later, I walked past a garage on my way to get coffee. The scent of oil in the air hit me unexpectedly. For a moment, I paused, letting the memory surface. Not with pain, but with understanding. What happened didn't break me, freed me. I continued walking with a steady, quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. There is no dramatic twist to this story. No sudden regret. No unexpected reconciliation. No moment where fate brings people back together. Some endings stay endings. And not all endings are tragedies. Leaving her wasn't the hardest thing I ever did. Staying with her would have been. I didn't walk away from a marriage. I walked back into my own life, and that was the healthiest decision I ever made.